Hey there, Legal Tea listeners. This is your host, Jenny Roselle. Welcome back for another episode today. The intro may have sounded a little different. My recording platform switched up some things on me, and I just didn't really like the new vibe. So I totally switched platforms between last episode and this one. And I kind of like this new one better anyway. So nonetheless, it's still me on the other side. You haven't gotten rid of me yet. Today is a current trends topic where we talk about things going on currently that are relevant and pertinent to my estate and elder law world. Or maybe they're things I've seen on the news or stumbled across on social media. Today's current trends topic, we're going to talk about what I'm going to call triggers to do an estate plan. And that is, most of us know that estate planning is important, right? But at the end of the day, it usually stays on people's to-do list for a long, long time until something happens. Since we're heading into summertime and when kids and grandkids are out of school, this is the time of year that most people are on the move, including going on vacations and cool things like that. It's also when my law firm sees an uptick in estate planning. So when I was thinking about this episode, I was thinking about vacations being just kind of a often cited trigger or reason of doing an estate plan, but I figured I would just expand the topic to do kind of the most popular triggers I see. So let's get started. Oh, before we get started, you need to make sure you tune in for the entire episode because at the end, I have a bit of a special and a fun announcement. So stay with me here. First, the first trigger that I want to talk about is a death in the family or maybe a death of just someone near and dear to you. I was talking to someone just yesterday who pulled me aside at an event I was at and wanted to ask me a couple legal questions. Well, long story short, she had a death in the family. It's her mother, and it really caused her to stop and realize how her and her husband have nothing in place estate planning wise. So that's kind of what I mean with this trigger that, usually, not always, but usually people do not leisurely just say, today is the day I'm going to call an estate attorney. I just cannot wait to talk about my incapacity and my death. Now, sometimes people do, but not often at all. But if that is you, you and I have the same love language. Like this example I just shared, experiencing a death is definitely a trigger. I'm sure it's that life gets busy and days and weeks fly by, and then something like that happens and it just jolts us back to reality. Like, oh, well, that could happen to me too. And it's scary to think like that, but it is reality. Now, this is not a surprising thing to say, guys, but none of us are escaping death. It's not an if, it's a when. Now, this trigger most often happens when it is someone super near and dear to us. It could be a parent, like in the example I just shared. It could be a sibling. It could be a friend. Death impacts people for sure. And one of the impacts I see from my seat is that it causes people to look at themselves and say, what if that happened to me? Is my family protected? So this one is definitely a trigger to either do an estate plan or update an estate plan. A second trigger is a health event or a health scare. So it's similar to the first trigger, right? That, this one just kind of jolts people too. But sometimes the health event or the health scare happens to you or happens to me. And that scares the you-know-what out of us. A couple of recent examples of this that I've seen are, first, we recently helped a young couple. They're in their 40s, and the husband just got diagnosed with cancer. Now, it's not super late stage, but it's not good either. And he just started treatment, and so getting that diagnosis scared them, and now they're getting their estate planning done. Or another example is another couple where the husband's mother recently had a massive and serious health scare and ended up having to get a kidney transplant. Things got dicey for a while with the mom, as in they did not think she was going to survive. However, fortunately, mom got the kidney transplant and has since totally recovered. Going through all of this really caused the son and his wife to want to get their plan done because it was eye-opening, to say the least. A third trigger is, I'm going to call it kind of the big life event trigger. So like buying a house, or maybe buying your first house, or starting a family. Those are huge life events that usually cause people to stop themselves and say, oh gosh, I have more at stake now. I should probably get my ducks in a row. Which, to their credit, is really darn true. Like buying a house, you have an asset now. Or having a family, starting a family means you have other humans to care about. Like what happens to them if something happens to you? Sometimes, a lot of the demographic of this person in this category is like young adults, young families. And it's funny because oftentimes they'll say something like, man, I feel like such an adult now, like hashtag adulting, right? Well, newsflash, they're right. They're totally adults and totally adulting, but it's the right thing to do. And interestingly, when big events like this happen, those people usually do start thinking about this kind of stuff, like what happens to this new asset, or what happens to my humans if something happens to me. Now, the next trigger is divorce, whether it's in the family or yourself. I think many of us have experienced how emotional and sometimes hostile divorces can be. Because of the high emotions, I will often hear from clients when their kids or beneficiaries go through a divorce, and they'll say something like, I want to make sure that my, grandchild's dad's slimy little hands can never get his hands on my money. So we'll help people, of course, explore their options. But another thing to consider under this trigger is that sometimes the divorce is yours. And we will see people bust down my office door shortly after a divorce, or even immediately when a divorce is, papers are filed. Because emotions are usually really high, like I said, they often want to make sure that their soon-to-be ex-spouse or their ex-spouse has no authority to make healthcare decisions, has no authority to make financial decisions for them. And then once the divorce is actually final, they want to make sure their former spouse has no ability to get anything. So again, we will help those individuals figure out their best options as it relates to doing or updating an estate plan. Now, a last trigger, and this is kind of a more fun and positive one, is going on like a big trip or vacation coming up. I see people finally get their estate plan done prior to either a big trip, like going outside the United States, or maybe a trip that's like without the kids. So think like mom and dad of a young family, or going on a fun anniversary trip to the Caribbean or something. And I guess they don't even have to be a young family, right? It could just be, both parents. Well, they will get worried sometimes that something will happen to both of them, leaving their kids or their beneficiaries exposed and protected, or not protected, I should say, because of a lack of an estate plan. So a little on this, I've had people reach out to my office like just a couple weeks before leaving. And that's really not enough time, guys. Ideally, it's something you should start looking at and doing months before you leave. And that way, if you prefer a type of an estate plan that takes longer than just a couple weeks to do and to create, so say like a trust, for example, you will have plenty of time to do things the right way. I've seen people wait too close to their departure and then push forward with doing a really basic plan just to get something on paper, which is fine and dandy, but sometimes a basic plan is not what they would have wanted to do from their estate planning perspective. So then they're left with, okay, we'll do this basic plan now, then come back and do the right plan later. And that's so inefficient for them. I mean, we're all busy. That's really inefficient for them. Me and my office, we're going to be at the office regardless. So it's really not inefficient for us. And plus, it could result in additional legal fees due to having to revise that basic plan to get them on the plan that they wanted to do in the first place. I would personally recommend contacting an estate attorney as soon as you decide to book the trip. Even if it feels super far out, then you'll have plenty of time. Or if it feels like there's not enough time, we could still work some magic, like I said. It's just, it's probably going to be something very basic, but basic is also better than nothing. Now, on this topic, here comes my special announcement. Are you ready? Well, I myself am going on a really big trip for 2 whole weeks. I am heading to Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, and I'm taking my awesome 16-year-old nephew. One of the best things I've ever done in my life was a program called Semester at Sea. And this sounds too good to be true, or it sounds like I'm making it up, but I lived on a ship. And yeah, you heard that right. And I sailed the world when I was in college. So I also took college courses while I did all this. And I ended up going to a slew of different countries, and it was amazing to quite literally see the world. Now, my nephew's school is offering students to go on this voluntary trip. It's not required, of course. And since traveling is one of the best things I've ever done in my life, I am trying to do the same for him. He's a young kid from rural Indiana, and I feel like I have the opportunity to show him there's more out there than probably what he sees day in and day out. So I bring this up because if you are a faithful Legal Tea listener, you know that I usually do not work too far ahead on recording these episodes, and there's a method to my madness. But right now, I'm kind of want to say I'm in scramble mode, only because we leave here really soon in like 2 weeks. And I have people wanting to meet with me before I'm gone because they don't want to wait until after I get back. So I keep squeezing them into places that I don't really have free space. And then my weeks after my trip are starting to really book up too. So something I do really well is like I have the ability to stop and like pause and look at the writing on the wall. And I can tell that I'm going to start getting really stressed about time and leaving, and that stress will carry a post-trip, of course, of getting caught up. So because of that, for the next 4 weeks, they will technically be repeat episodes. I am going to re-record them so that they kind of flow better, but all 4 have been done before. Granted, the 4 that I have pulled are ones that I did at the very, 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 very beginning. So unless you're a like die-hard Legal Tea listener, which I know there's some of you are out there, if you're not, hopefully this will just be new content for you. But if you've been with me from the beginning, it will be a nice little refresher. Like, oh yeah, I totally remember that happening. That was wild. I'm doing this because it will allow me some, kind of time and space and grace, I guess I could say, of just, not only getting ready for the trip, but also coming home and getting caught up. And to be transparent, like I've talked about before on this podcast, I do this for $0. I earn $0 is probably the way I should say it. I'm probably technically in the hole because I do have expenses like for my website, for the domain, and for recording these things. These all come with expenses. And so at the end of the day, my law firm and my team and its clients are what pays my bills, guys. So I have to prioritize accordingly. And I really need to prioritize my law firm and getting ready to leave and coming home. And I hope that makes sense. It makes sense in my head, at least. And by the way, I do have my estate plan done. It'd sure be the pot calling the kettle black if I did not. So I'm signing off with brand new content, at least for the next 4 weeks. Like I said, I will be re-recording all the next 4 episodes so that they kind of flow together. At these endings, I usually give kind of a sneak peek for the next week. So if I just plopped the old episodes, that would just get kind of confusing. So next week, we're back to the celebrity estate planning type of episode. And during those types of episodes, we dive into a celebrity or big name that has passed away and really dive into how their estate looked from like an estate planning perspective. Next week's episode is the infamous Robin Williams, one of my favorites. The amount of times I quote Mrs. Doubtfire, I probably should be embarrassed of it. But anyway, tune into that next week, Legal Tea listeners. Talk to you then and stay well.